Welcome to Active Love Adoptions podcast. I am your host, Jessica Griffith. This is my lovely co-host, Heidi. And today we have Stormie Nielsen on. We're really excited to have her. We've been waiting for a long time. She is the CEO and founder of Focal Point. It is an agency that focuses on education and resources for transracial adoptions and the BIPOC community. She is also an LCSW. Mm-hmm. And we seriously could not be more excited to have you on.
I'm excited to be here.
So as we were just talking, you said BIPOC community. We don't know what that is. Could you just explain to us what that is?
So BIPOC is an acronym. It stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color.
Okay.
So that is it. As like Black practicing clinicians, our main clientele that come to us, that seek us out, are people of color. And so, I mean, that's largely what we serve. And then I would say of that community, of the BIPOC community that we're serving, roughly like, I would say 70% happen to be transracial adoptees.
Okay.
That are coming into our office. So yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. I've never heard the acronym before, but now.
Me either.
Now we know.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up? Just kind of tell us a little background about yourself.
So background, I'll give you full background.
Yes.
I'm a transracial adoptee myself. So that's kind of what got me into serving that population. But I was born in Philadelphia, adopted as a baby, about 6 weeks old, and then was raised here in Pleasant Grove. I come from a family of 6 kids, all transracial adoptees as well, all Black. And let's see, after graduating high school, I had a stint at at SUU. I thought I was going to do nursing. And then I was like, I hate math, hate science. That's all that this is. So after taking some time, I was introduced to social work. And so I did my bachelor's at UVU and then went on to do my master's at the U. And that brought me up to Salt Lake. And I've been up there since.
Okay, awesome.
It's amazing.
I know, and you're so young. At 29, you've done all these amazing things.
I know.
And do your parents still live in Pleasant Grove then?
So my dad is down here in Orem. My parents had split up like sometime in high school, and my mom is up in West Point area.
Okay, awesome. So tell me your experience as a transracial adoptee, and then how that has helped. I mean, obviously, because of your experience, it's helped you become a better therapist and
specifically work with people who are in that position.
Yeah. So I feel like my experience was not, I don't know, I'm trying to give this more context. Like I hear so many stories about transracial adoptees and stepping into that work and making that kind of my niche. I've had to learn so much more about transracial adoption that I just really was like, what? That happens?
So it didn't happen in your experience ish. Okay.
Ish. So, and I'll tell you kind of how I got there. So doing schooling, when you're doing your master's, everything happens to be a mental health focus. And so after graduation, I was working with Utah Youth Village, and they worked with youth who are in foster care. And so seeing that residential side of things and seeing these kids who some of them are adopted or were adopted and end up back in treatment, and then going to work at a private residential, again, I kept seeing kids come in that were adopted. And I was like, what is this correlation of these kids coming back into treatment that are adopted? And so that got me curious there. And so eventually I broke off, started my practice. But when you look at like the mental health of transracial adoptees and just overall well-being, like it makes sense that they end up in treatment. So my hope is to like help stop some of that, bridge that gap there so that they have their services met. But looking at just their experiences of navigating like race, navigating the adoption trauma. When I look at my own experience, I think there was a lot with race navigation, but not a lot of like adoption trauma. It wasn't until I was older where mostly when I got in contact with my birth family, that I had to really like dive into my own adoption trauma stuff. It was like right there at the surface and very, very challenging. But yeah, so that's where I kind of explored things. And it wasn't until college that I really had to like deep dive into race and recognize that some of the experiences that I did have growing up, though at the time they didn't feel overwhelming, like looking back on them later, I was like, oh, those were microaggressions. Oh, those were like discriminatory, things like that.
So do you feel that all of your siblings, because you said they're all Black, correct? that they experienced all those things? Have you been able to talk with them and ask them their experiences?
Yes. So I wouldn't say all of them. I have a couple siblings where when you kind of see how they're doing and where they're at, I feel like it kind of aligns with where some TRAs end up. And I'm like, okay, it makes sense as to like how we got here. My other siblings, ones that I would say I talk to the most, we've talked about some of our adoption stuff, especially like me and my sister, and kind of where she stands. And she definitely had a lot of things growing up where it like came into play, and she recognizes that. Like she was telling me one time, she remembers being younger and kind of having to tell herself, like, if I never meet these people, like, how do I want to proceed with my life, and having to, at a young age, come to terms with like, I might never know my birth family, but feeling like kind of outside and different, and a disconnect from, the home you're growing up in.
Like Pleasant Grove, I feel it's Utah. I'm not from here. I'm from California. Yeah. She's also from California. It's not a very diverse place,
it's very
especially
homogenous.
Utah County.
Yes.
So did your parents, were they aware of this, kind of how to navigate that?
To a degree, I would say yes. I feel like my parents did the best that they can. I think that, I was talking to my mom maybe a couple months ago, and she was saying, we didn't really want to move you guys to like this area because we knew it was going to be harder based on, and it wasn't necessarily because of the like racial piece, but just it was a different like SES, like socioeconomic status in that area.
Oh, for sure.
And so they like didn't want that to be some type of like barrier in our interactions and things like that. But I would say overall, like we grew up like going to things for Black History Month. We grew up like trying to be in certain spaces when there was different activities and camps and things like that. And it wasn't frequent, but it did happen. And we also had other families that had adopted other kids that we were always hanging out with. Like my best friend that I was talking about earlier, our families grew up together. Like they were at our place, we were at their place. Like we lived in their backyard when we were there, and they lived in ours when they were at our house. And so, I think having just those social connections that way, it was like, and having all the siblings in the home be adopted and be Black, was a protective factor.
That's why I did it that way too, because I knew what they would face around them, and I wanted them to have
each other.
Yeah, that because they're going through the same things as they grow up. The same, so they would have each other to lean on through those periods of time that we couldn't help.
Well, and kids can be real.
You would be amazed.
You would like even. Me, who wasn't adopted, growing up, I still had kids singing like the Jenny Craig song to me because I was overweight, making fun of certain things, like things like that.
Jenny Craig.
It doesn't.
I was mad at Medusa because I was stronger than the boys. And I was called Happy Hormones because I developed really young.
Oh my gosh.
Good times.
What is that? I can still actually remember that it was 1993 when they were singing the Jenny Craig song, because it was like 1-800-93.
Okay.
But it's so kids can be really mean when you're not different.
Right.
And then when you are different, I can't even imagine how that.
Another factor that plays in, which people don't think about, is how my boys were accepted and how the girls are.
Right.
It's completely different
dynamic for sure.
Yes.
Why is that? Like coming from like what your perspective is, but then maybe coming from a professional perspective?
No, just what I noticed, my boys were more popular and were taken in more than the girls are. The girls are more outcasted than the boys are.
Yep.
And I that's a society thing, I'm assuming, just the area.
I couldn't say what makes it more comfortable for the boys to be taken in. I know that they have other tribes, if you will, like in sports and things like that.
Yeah,
and so it kind of cuts down those barriers. But if you aren't like an athlete, and you don't have that same tribe, it's like I don't know, I feel like you tend to stick out in a different way. When we look at just like American standards of beauty or European standards of beauty, like all of us, like people of color, we don't fit that standard. And I think that there's a lot in the narrative that has changed in that over the years. But when you look at Utah and it's like homogenous state, and then you compare like our Black girls specifically to, the rest of the population, they don't fit that beauty standard. And you grow attracted to what you are surrounded the most by.
Yeah.
And so that leaves our girls feeling, leaves them feeling not good enough, leaves them feeling unwanted, not feeling beautiful, wanting to try to change themselves to fit what they think that everybody's going to like and find beautiful.
Well, like an impossible standard.
And then dating. My daughters had they really didn't get asked out or anything.
Yeah.
But the boys, they were all gravitated to.
Which is so interesting but also is irritating. It's very irritating
It
to
is.
me.
Yes. Oh, it totally is.
I mean, so my birth son is half Black. So it was really important to me to find a interracial couple because I was really adamant. I really wanted him, so his dad is from Africa, even though he wasn't a typical Americanized Black man like his dad was.
Yeah.
I wanted him to have some sense of self and some sense of, and I don't know if that was a good decision or a bad decision, but after talking with him, he's never felt different, but also he's a boy. And then his sisters they're both of color. And so they've had a different experience for sure than he has, obviously. But that was really important to me because being a kid is hard enough.
Yes.
And then being adopted is hard.
So.
And then also you're Black, half Black or whatever. And so I know a lot of people have talked about, especially when you're half, they're like, well, we don't fit in the white community, but we also don't fit in. We're not Black enough for the Black community. So then where does that leave us? With the adoptees that have come to you, obviously I understand you can't give us specifics, but have you noticed an overall trend when they come in? Like what are maybe the top 3 things that are most concerning to them or that have caused them most conflict or trauma in their lives?
I would say the number one thing, to be honest, I work with a lot of teens. The number one thing is dealing with racism at school because they don't really know how to handle it. They don't know how to talk to their parents about it. It's new for them because they feel like they are we can go into it more later. So I guess number 2, I would say just navigating that aspect of identity and having white parents, like having, because sometimes there's a disconnect from their adoptive parents. And so trying to navigate that and normalize certain feelings for them or for themselves. And then lastly, I would say like the biological family stuff and just those core adoption or adoptee beliefs that we take on about why we're adopted.
What are those?
Yeah,
I would love to hear the core.
So core beliefs. Every kid grows up hearing different stories about why they're adopted. I think sometimes we try to like sugarcoat it or make it sound great. But a lot of adoptees, it's an abandonment wound. And so, taking on those beliefs of like, I'm not good enough. If I was, then they wouldn't have, given me up. I was a mistake. I wasn't supposed to be here type of a thing. Things like, some of the beliefs are like, I have to do good, I have to whatever, so that I can receive love, things like that, because they're chasing this attachment, chasing this connection, and answers that they didn't really
Do you think that that's what causes them, was some of your clients to feel a disconnect with the adoptive family?
Yes, I do. I have a lot of, not mixed feelings, but I have a lot of feelings when it comes to the expectation of adoptive parents and adoptive families and where the child should stand. I've talked to people where they're like, I just don't feel this way toward my adoptive parents. And I like that creates conflict because they feel like they should have this certain type of connection because we see that connection amongst biological families and it's just different. And so there's that disconnect there because there's like this conflict of like, I'm supposed to feel this way and I don't.
What's the way that they feel like they're supposed to feel? I'm sorry. I'm going to
no, you're good.
You're
good. And that's the thing is like, I'm trying to figure out the best way to break this down.
You know what I mean? To nail it down because like I said, my 4 are. And so my biggest concern is that, but I hope that they don't, because they're my children. Right. I don't see anything but that. And I know people don't like to hear that. Right. But in reality, they're my babies. And that's
definitely like a lot of people hold that, right? Where it's like, those are your kids.
Yes.
And I think for adoptees, like we can respect that. However, we always know that there's this other person out there that birthed us. And so it's a different connection. And I think that sometimes when, because there's a lot of families that are always telling their kids, like, we're adopted, or like, you guys are adopted, you're adopted from start, like, we love you, all these different things, which are the messages that they should be hearing. But then there's also the messages that sometimes deny them, I guess, the grief.
Yes.
And the reality of there is somebody else out there that birthed them, that they, have this grief toward, that they should have had this whole other life, And so I would say that, an inability to validate that space for them creates a lot of disconnect. But also, and this, I learned this when I was doing work with CCFS. Like, I was shocked the very first time that I had learned that, some of these kiddos, they were adopted and returned back to the system. And I was like, you could do that? Like, I didn't know that you could do that.
You totally can. Yes. Through the foster care
I was going to say,
system.
is that just with foster care, or is like, if even through adoption, obviously, I guess is the same thing. Like,
You can replace that child if you feel like you're not capable of caring for that child.
They'll end up back in state's custody.
Yeah, you would sign your rights away.
That's like
we haven't had that
trauma.
We haven't had that happen with usually newborn adoptions. That doesn't happen as often.
Yeah,
but when you're dealing with foster care children that have been in foster care in and out, you get all of that baggage on top of abandonment and then in and out and attachment. And Shannon, my sister, she's adopted too through foster care, and they've had so many issues. And see, and that's the thing though, is it better to place a child at birth or to have them in and out of foster care, which people do? I mean, the damage that causes in and out and attaching. And I don't know. I just don't think it's a very good system. I mean, honestly,
I've had just more recently with, I've joined some like birth mother Facebook groups. And there was a lot of things that I was like, what? Like, oh my gosh, like, this is how birth mothers feel. Like, I didn't feel like that. But it was interesting to me how there's a lot of trauma that comes with adoption, right?
Yes.
On both sides. How can like birth mothers, for example, handle the grief of placing a baby, but also recognizing that this was probably the best choice for them, because the choice to keep them could give a whole new set of problems. I mean, in my current my situation, my parents were like, if you keep this baby, you cannot live here. So I'm like, okay, so I'd be homeless, with a newborn, zero money. I'm like, could I have done it at 18? Honestly, probably not.
It's been a struggle bus for sure.
Yeah. I'm like, I couldn't imagine.
See, and there's a reason why those birth moms came to that decision.
I know, but I guess there's that inner struggle too, because I always think like, I randomly will think I just should have kept him. I just should have kept him.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, would that have really been the best for him? Or was it more a selfish thing on my part? Like, I just couldn't deal with that.
I don't think that there's a direct right answer. Like, I'm all about autonomy and people being able to make decisions for themselves. And so, like, whether somebody chooses to place a baby or keep the baby, like, that's the decision. And there is going to be consequences, positive or negative, right, to any decision.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, those are areas where you just have to practice acceptance and then, deal with what the current is. Like, if you place this child and this child's life didn't turn out the way that you hoped, like, there's acceptance there. And how can we find healing in that? If you've placed a child and you are having mixed feelings about it, like, the child's been placed, how can you grieve that properly, get to some acceptance, and then find healing for yourself in that decision as well? Because it can't be changed, you know? Yeah. So, but I don't know, like, I always hear, and this is more so for TRAs or from TRAs, but, trying to find more work to keep families together so that people don't have to place their children. And I'm all about that from a societal standpoint. I also am not going to tell somebody what decision to make for their life either.
Yeah.
And, working with youth in foster care, like, you have, you do learn that not everybody wants to parent, not everybody is capable of parenting, and not everybody should be allowed to parent.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm not going to say, you birthed this child, you have to keep this child and, have all the struggles that come with it. Like, you are allowed to place your child and go from there. And the hope is that those who are adopting, like, step up and, you know, provide for the kid the way that you are hoping that they would, you know?
I had a question. I just had a question and I just lost it. Do you have?
I was just gonna say, because I've taken each of my children aside and asked them about contacting their birth family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of them don't. They say they don't want contact.
Yeah.
They would just like to. I mean, my girls are biological siblings, so I got my oldest, and then my second one was born 10 and a half months later. And so those two kind of know what a sibling would look like. And my youngest one, that situation's interesting because his biological sister has placed 2 babies through the agency, but they're with my family. So I have 2 of my sisters. One has his biological, what would be his biological nephew, and his biological niece is with another sister. So he has people that look like him.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then my third son, I was close to, and I have a picture of, but all of them say it's not something that they're interested in pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
Do I leave it with that and just respect what they're saying? Because I've told them before, I go, you're not going to hurt my feelings.
Right.
I totally get
Right.
that this is something that you would have to do. I'm to a point now that I want what's best for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And we push our feelings aside. And they still say that. So do I just go with that?
I would just go with that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I'm biased in this because in my experience, like I was not the one who made contact with my bio family first. It was my
Okay.
mom.
Okay.
And that created a whole ripple effect of things.
Yeah.
And so I would say if they don't want to at that time, like to let that be.
Okay.
But it sounds like, you know, because you've brought it to their attention that hopefully if they choose that and they want to, that they know that you support them in that.
Yes. Yes. I totally said, I'm like, you know, whatever you want, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whatever
Yeah.
you need.
It brings up a whole, I think, because when I was younger, I really was like, once I meet my bio family or if I meet them, it'll like complete these things. It's like, that's the end of the story. Like I'll know where I come from. And that is absolutely false.
Yes.
Like it's just this whole other
It's like the
mix
tip of the iceberg.
Honestly, it's like there's
opens
so
a whole
much
bunch of
after
wounds,
it.
right?
So
Yes.
much, like so many wounds open,
Yes.
so many like hard conversations to be had, awkward interactions. And I'm very fortunate. Like my bio family is super great. Like I'm very blessed to, you know, have the things play out the way that they did. But for a lot of people, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if you open that book, like you have to be prepared for
Whatever.
more emotions or
Yeah.
more rejection.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, it's a lot, whichever way it goes. Even the joyous parts was a lot.
Yeah.
So how did you personally deal with those things? And you said it was a great thing. So you weren't dealing with the rejection, but obviously there was a lot.
There was
a lot
moments,
of
but like, I mean, I'll give you the story. It was a lot. So I was on a trip for school in Mexico and my mom like had called me and was like, hey, I got in contact with your birth mom. This is what she said, da-da-da. And it just basically sounded like she didn't want to talk to me. Didn't want anything to do with it. And went from there. And me and my mom are very different, the way that we handle things and have conversations with people about things. And so I definitely felt away. I was like, I don't know. I think I had this belief of like, if I would have reached out, if it would have been me, it would have been a different response, you know? But also it's like, that's my personal business. Why are you like doing that?
Yeah.
And so that was a whole thing. But feeling that rejection was hard for sure. And then it's probably a month later, my bio brother reached out to me because he stayed in the family. He was not adopted out. He was kind of raised with my grandmother and my birth mom.
Was he older or younger than you?
Older. So
Okay.
I would be the baby of the family.
Okay.
In my adoptive home, I'm in the middle, but bio family, I'm the baby. And so he reached out to me and we just started talking from there. And he's super great. Him and I just like hit it off. Like it was easy. We met up that summer in LA area.
Is that where he was living or that's where your bio family?
So
like, where are
they're
they?
all still in Philly.
Okay.
We met up in LA because I was going out there for a birthday trip with my friends and he was going out there for a work thing. And so we met up and it was a
That
good
was
time.
serendipitous.
It was fun. It was good. We made it work. And then, COVID hit. So then like, I think it was a year and a half, 2 years later, I finally was able to like fly out to Philly and meet people. But I only met like a few of them on my grandmother's side. And then the next time I went out, I was able to meet my grandfather and some of my aunts on that side. And then the next time it was like way more and lots more. In the summer, it'll be like family reunions. So I'll meet like tons of people that I haven't met yet. I'm excited for it. But in all of that, like, I mean, it took a couple different trips and different interactions for me and Dawn, is her name, my birth mom, to like finally like, I don't know, like have out what we needed to have out and have the conversations. And it was the last time I was out there. It was very like, it was like awkward touch and go, because we would have conversations, but they were never like in-depth conversations. Yeah. They were very surface level, tiptoeing around each other. But one morning she's like, I'm going to go and grab some coffee. And I was just all like, I told myself it's now or never. So I was like, I'll come with you, because I was staying at their place, and so I was like, it's now or never. Went with her and finally was able to kind of just ask her some of my questions and get some answers. And I was out there for my birthday. So it was like, after that, I went to like birthday breakfast with my grandfather and met some of my great aunts. But then even just being in that space where, everybody's telling me different stories about my birth mom and how they remember her, and, these different personalities of her that I don't know, helped me to paint a more complete picture of who she is, which I also found healing in, because, as an adoptee, you like create this, like, I think my birth mom would be like this, or sometimes it's negative connotations depending on why you're adopted. So it gave me a more complete picture. But even those, it was like so many overwhelming emotions. But it was like a lot of gratitude and a lot of joy in that trip. But the trips prior, like, I mean, it was tears and emotions and like I think the first time I was out there, that was very, very hard. The second time was challenging, but not as hard. I remember having a conversation with my bio brother, and people are like, you need to, like, you might be the one that has to lead because Dawn feels whatever, or Dawn whatever. And I just was like, I don't care. This is about me. Like, it was, I don't know. It was a whole thing. I was like, I'm in my emotions. What about me?
Yeah.
And, I've had supports the whole way through, but like, it was a lot. It was a lot. So, and now we're good.
Did you ever feel anger towards your mom? And did you ever know anything about your birth father, or was that just not even?
So I don't know anything about my birth father. We are convinced, my brother and I, Steven is his name, that we don't have the same birth father. Okay. I don't think any of us do. But the person who raised him and raised my bio sister, that's the oldest, that's who he considers his father. Okay. And that's who signed all of our birth certificates. But we don't think we all have the same bio father. So, but I haven't asked that. That was one of my questions when I was like in the car with Dawn, and amongst all the other things, that was like the least important, and one I forgot to ask at that time.
Yeah. Because it doesn't really matter to you, does it? Or would you like to know?
There's definitely curiosity there. I'm like, do I take a DNA test? And then I don't trust sending my genetics out somewhere. And I've just heard stories about people sending their DNA out and just like it not being accurate. So I'm like, do I want to spend the money? Which honestly, I could just ask her, but I really assume her answer is going to be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
it could be this person, or this person.
Yeah.
I mean, at least you'd narrow it down kind of, like you're like, okay, well, 3 people out of,
I could try.
7 billion.
Yes. No, there was a lot of, one of the reasons I was placed was because Dawn was very much in her addiction at that point. Mm-hmm. And so she was not going to be capable of taking care of me, because she wasn't even taking care of the other 2. And so like,
she probably
I'm just like, I don't think there would be a memory of like, it was this person.
So then do you think that most adopted children want to see the birth mom, but the birth father isn't as important?
I would say most. However, I do find it interesting when my clients are like, have this anger toward a birth father figure that they've never met.
Okay.
And
so it's usually
and you're like,
more
how
driven.
can you have it towards them, but not like the mom?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like they have this expectation of a man and how a man and a father is supposed to show up and be a protector and a leader. And they didn't. So then there's just a lot of anger there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I've actually asked my son multiple times, because I'm like, do you want to meet your birth father? Like, do you have any desire to meet him? Because I know where he lives. I have the information if he wants it. I haven't spoken to him in for 100 years, which that's good. Anyways, but he's like, no,
He's
like I
like,
have
yeah,
no desire,
no
but
desire.
he and I have a relationship, and he has liked having that relationship with me. And he also has had relationships with my nieces and nephews. And he's found this whole new family.
Right.
And I asked him even, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, I said, so are you, because my mom had found some pictures of his birth dad. And she's like, I'm going to send these to him. I'm like, please don't, because he's not in that space to take that. So if you need to send him somewhere, to send him to me. I did tell my son though, I said, look, just so you know, if you want to meet him, I understand, because you want to have this complete picture of who you are. Right. But also I don't think he'd add value to your life. And if that's something that is important to you, like, I don't think it was necessary, and he just doesn't have a desire. And I'm always curious as to why. Like a little part of me is like, why don't you want to know?
and that's why I was asking, because it seems to me that most of them want to know the mother.
Yeah.
But the father's like not.
Have you
as
noticed
important.
though, like with your own kids, like the difference between how the boys are and the girls are when it comes to adoption stuff?
Yeah. So boys don't adjust well. I mean, they don't ask for help.
Right.
And they don't tell you their feelings. It's really hard to pull stuff out of them. And then my girls, my second one, she actually goes to counseling, but it's not for that. It's for other things that she has going on in her life. But they'll talk to me more. My youngest is my hardest. So he just
like clams up and doesn't share.
He thinks it's a man thing.
Oh, to just not share emotions?
Yes. And
is your husband like that though? Does he not share emotion? Because I think sometimes they
he
reflect.
does.
Okay.
He does, but it's like some things I swear are built into them, just personality wise and stuff. I mean, how he deals with things, how he reacts to things are completely opposite and hard for me, because I'm more of a feely type of person, and he's more of he cuts it. And so if I get a little bit out of him, I'm ecstatic.
Yeah.
Because he has to be in a certain type of mood and all this stuff in order to get anything out of him. So my second one, and then my second to last son, it depends on his mood. And he'll ramble and follow you around the house and talk. So, but as far as the adoption thing, all of them say it's not a thing.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm coming from, as I'm concerned. Is it really a thing? And they're just not telling me. But I've gone to them and individually, because I didn't want to do it as a group, and said to them, I'm here. If you want to do it, let me know. And we will totally do it. But they always tell me it's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's not a thing. But yes, how they deal with it. The girls act like it's no, I don't know.
Okay.
All of them.
And the
like
reason I
it's no
ask is
thing.
because like when I have boys in my office, like the parents bring them and they're like, we want to address adoption stuff, but the kid doesn't want to address adoption stuff.
No.
So I'm like, can't force it out of them.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's the boys that are more like not trying to have those conversations. And
because it's uncomfortable, or
I think it's uncomfortable. I think that, I mean, the emotion thing, right? Our boys are kind of like raised and nurtured to
like,
not
don't
show
cry,
emotion.
don't show
I
emotion.
know. I'm like, I don't understand that either, because
It's
I don't.
societal.
It's society.
Oh, it's
yes.
totally
Definitely
societal.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Jacob is my son's name, and he, when we did the podcast with him, he was having a really hard time like admitting to me his feelings towards me.
Yeah.
Because a part of him felt like he was somehow rejecting his mom by saying, I have this connection with you. So what do you tell your clients or patients when that's something like, they're like, how do I reconcile
when the birth
having
mother's
these,
in it?
like these two women or these two men in my life, and they are of equal importance.
Right.
But I feel the same about both of them, but one raised me.
Right.
And then one I didn't know for 20 years.
Right.
But now I'm like in their life and it feels so normal. So what do you like, how do you reconcile that?
I try to like normalize that, right? And it's okay to have like the best of both worlds. I think that a lot of the clients that I work with, like they're trying to figure out the dynamics of like adoptive family and bio family and these feelings here and these feelings here, and even just like circumstantial, you know. And what I tell them is like, you get to choose the parts where you find joy in the journey. You can have both parts of these things. Like this is, you know, it's like more people to love you and more people to accept you, and you get to decide what you want these relationships to look like. I think that sometimes finding that balance for the adoptee is challenging because of like what we either hear from like bio mom or what we hear from like our adoptive home as well. Because we don't want to like hurt anybody's feelings either. And so like I've had friends who they've reached out to their bio families and the relationships are good. But like they were very much met with, I'm your mom, I'm your mother, like call me mom. And they're like, but you're not my mom, you're not my mother, you didn't raise me.
Yeah, like you didn't wake up with me in the middle of the night, you didn't like clean up vomit.
And that's the thing though, is that maybe realize that a birth mom's a birth mom, but it doesn't take the place of the person that did all those things.
And sometimes it's like forced. Like sometimes some birth moms like push it where it's like, no, you haven't seen me for 20 years of my life. Like I'm grown now. And they try to step into this role that you're not needing filled, you know? And so for the adoptee, it's like, you don't know me like that. You're overwhelming me, like stay away type of a thing.
Do they get a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Like not confrontive, but do they get a little defensive? Like, hey, whoa, like you can't come in and take the place of my mom.
Yes. And so it's just like recognizing the boundaries there. But even like for me, like, you know, I've had to recognize that it's not my job to like hold space for like my parents' emotions about the whole thing or even my siblings' emotions about it. Because I know, you know, there was definitely like my connection with my bio brother is like super great. But I know that some of my other siblings, specifically boys, were like, no, like you're our sister and we're your brothers.
Got a little territorial.
So it's like possessive. So it's like we're your brother. But even with my mom, there was just like her having to navigate her emotions, you know. And she like had told me one day, she's like, I have to admit, like sometimes I feel a little jealous, like when you do talk about Dawn, you know. But like the role that my mom played growing up it's not replaced just because I met my birth mom. But my mom's feelings, as I'm navigating my adoption stuff, like it's not my responsibility to like hold that space for her, you know, because it is also an emotional journey for me. And so I think adoptive parents recognizing that like your child is not replacing you.
It's a very hard thing to do.
Yes.
It's a very hard thing to navigate. Because that line, because you're like, wait a minute, because we are possessive, just like your brothers are. They're like, wait a minute, I raised you, I took care of you, you're mine. And then getting to a point where you're like, okay, I've got to share this because that's what's in the best interest of the child. And so, we have to deal with our own crap.
But why is it easier to share? Like, I can share my niece, like with everybody, right? She's my niece. But then what's the difference between being like, well, wait a minute, like this is a whole nother separate thing that I can't share with, but we can share with people that we've been with. Cause I'm sure your brothers feel like, oh, I can share you with my cousins, like our cousins, like, or my aunts and uncles, like they're like, I
think it's a different type of sharing though. I think there's a line,
right?
You know what I mean? Because sharing with a cousin is different than being a mother or father to this child. Or a sibling that was raised in that. And that you develop different relationships. So it's like, I think that's one thing that we have to learn is that, or call it something different, because a birth mom can't come in and think you're going to take that and be looked at just like the adoptive mom who's been there and done everything and all of that for having the child. So I think that maybe if we call it something different, do you know what I mean? Then mom, this is my mom and this is my mom, because
it's different. Like, I refer to my birth mom as Dawn. Like that's her name to me, and everybody knows that. It's funny when like Steven and I are talking because like I'll be like your mom, I'll be like Dawn. But like I don't know. Even like I have cousins, bio cousins, they'll talk to me and they'll be like, you're looking more and more like your mom every day, or like things like that. And like, I'm not going to to them, but
in your mind, you're like, no, I don't look anything like that.
You're like, okay. I mean, maybe you have some mannerisms of her because you were raised by her, like your adoptive mom.
Yeah.
You know, but I think because it's nature versus nurture, right? So some of the things like Jacob reminds me of my brother. It's the weirdest thing. I'm like, you have the mannerisms, like you act, but he also resembles his dad, like his adopted father in a lot of the mannerisms that he has. So it's just like this weird, and every now and then you catch a glimpse like, oh. Like,
well, I mean like my cousins, like my biological cousins, like they'll FaceTime me and they'll be like, oh, you look like your mom. And I'm
that's
like,
why I said, that's why I said, no.
Dawn.
Dawn. She doesn't look anything like her adopted mom.
Well, But
that's what she was saying.
Oh,
She
got
was
it.
like, well,
That's
in her
funny.
mind, she
like
was
in her mind, yeah,
thinking,
because you're
Mhm.
thinking like, yeah, my mom, like we don't look anything
Yeah.
alike. But you're like, Dawn, got it.
Yep.
I know
Mhm.
Jacob calls me Jessica. Actually, I don't think he calls me anything. Like he doesn't
Ah.
call me mom,
Okay.
but I
Yeah.
don't want him to
Yeah.
because I feel uncomfortable with that because I'm
Mhm.
like, I didn't raise you. Like,
Right.
I know you as a 20-year-old man,
Mm-hmm.
and like you're not the same baby that I placed. Like that baby, you guys are two separate people to me. And yes, I felt that. I even referenced. I was like, I kind of feel more like your aunt.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Yeah.
was almost offended by that a little bit. Like, well, I don't see you like that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, is that?
It's the significance of like, I mean, you grow up your whole life like thinking about this birth mom.
Yeah.
Like for positive or negative. Like, and so I guess I would understand why he might be offended about it because to
You're more
him,
than
you're
that.
always, you're a birth mom.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
not a aunt, not a cousin. Like
I
there's
know.
a significance in that.
And maybe, like I was telling Heidi, I'm like, maybe I do it to protect myself. That like
Possibly.
I have to like remove myself a little bit because
Mhm.
I love hard
Mhm.
and I get like in people's spaces.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid like if I allow myself to think of myself as something different to him,
Yeah.
that I will cross a boundary that he's not comfortable with or that his mom is not comfortable with. And
well,
I
you're
don't.
birth mom. That you just stay there.
Yeah.
You're not aunt. You're not anything.
I know, but it's a weird space.
I know.
It's a weird
but-
space.
Mhm.
Probably just like an adoptee. It's just a weird
Yeah.
space.
It's a weird space,
Like you're in
yeah.
this gray area.
Yes.
It's
Because
all
it's like
imagined.
I will call my mom and talk to her and like give her catch up on life and things like that. But when like Dawn and I were trying to like figure out how to navigate, like it was surface level conversations. Now we can like talk on the phone and it's chill. But like I don't know, I don't see myself ever calling her mom.
Yeah.
And like I wouldn't say that I think of her like an aunt, but like I don't know, I would say the same as like with my adopted mom, like I'm an adult now, so I don't have the same needs
Yeah.
from like a mother figure. And so just like all children, like you hit adulthood and you try to find like friendship with your parents.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of where we're at on both
Has that
sides.
been easy with your adopted mom and your birth mom? I mean, not easy, but
It's still probably different.
So
it's ever changing.
I would say ever changing. No. So after the whole, like, here's your bio mom, here's the thing went down, like it was rough for her and I for, I would say at least 2 years.
Your adopted mom or your
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was at least 2 years. And like, I mean, I'm a therapist, been to therapy, do all that stuff, but I had to like go talk out all my adoption stuff in therapy and the attachment wounds and things like that. And then just talk about like, you know, like upbringing, home life, things like that. And after I was able to kind of like reconcile and settle those things, then I was able to have conversation with my mom. And since then, like we've been good, different boundaries, but like it's been good. And we've been able to have a good relationship and have respect for each other's boundaries and where we're coming from. So I would say yes. And then with Dawn, like I said, like we can call each other now and like have conversations and it's not awkward anymore. But it's still more comfortable to call my mom rather than
Yeah.
just call Dawn. So
Yeah.
Because she kind of has seen the good, bad, and the ugly of
Mhm.
all of the things.
Yes.
So it's easier because your mom's not going anywhere.
mhm.
She
'Cause I
knows
do
your
that.
personality.
Yeah.
Even just
And,
talking,
and you're loved no matter what, even
Yeah.
if you yell at us
Yeah.
or
or hey, like I can hang up the phone on my mom, which is not, I mean, it's not a great quality I have. Like if we're fighting, because in her mind, if
oh my gosh,
she's
I do
not
that.
mad, it's not a fight. And
Mhm.
99% of the time she's not mad.
Yeah.
And so I hung up on her and my mother-in-law was like, who was that? Like
Yeah.
my mom. She's like, you hung up on your mom?
So funny.
And I was like, yeah. She's like, I would cry. I'm like, well, I wouldn't hang up on you. She's
Yeah.
like, we have a different relationship.
Right.
And like, I know you would cry.
Right.
At the office, I've said stuff to my mom that is banter just back and forth
Yeah.
that we're used to.
Yeah.
And Isaac in the office is like, you shouldn't say that to your mother. I'm like, well, what?
You're like, no, we're good. We
Yeah,
have this whole other
this is
thing.
what we do.
Mhm.
You're like,
Mhm.
this is how we show love.
Yes. You don't
Yeah.
know us.
So talk to me too about the trauma bond, because that's something that has been new to me in the last probably 6
Mhm.
months, just seeing a lot of birth mothers who have been wounded severely in their personal adoption story, whether
Yeah.
that means their child wasn't raised the way. I mean, there's been a couple who posted saying like, my child took their own life with
Mhm.
this adopted family, you know. So talk to me about the trauma bond, maybe on both sides from an adoptee perspective, but then also from like a birth parent perspective.
Mhm. I don't know how heavily I can speak to the birth parent perspective by any means, but we'll start there. So,
She can tell you about the adoptees.
so when I'm talking about like attachment wounds and things like that. Like a baby's very first home, their whole universe, is like the womb. You're building all these connections and neural connections. And that's what is like your safe space. If given like a healthy pregnancy, right? And then from there, like a baby's born and skin to skin is happening where it's like you are removed from your first home, which can be like a shock to the system, but then skin to skin is happening to like re-soothe that and say, no, I know this place is a safe place, and continue those different connections happening in the brain. And with adoptive individuals, like you don't always receive that skin to skin. It wasn't always a healthy birth or like prenatal development, all that. In utero, that's the word I was looking for. It wasn't always like a healthy in utero development. Yeah. And so then, if you're not receiving that skin to skin, right? Like we know, like science will tell you that's not good for babies. And then some of these babies, they're passed from home to home before they are finally adopted out. And so all these different caregivers that they're coming across is not helping them to develop healthy attachments from the jump. But kind of going back to that idea of like, it's your first home. I've talked to my siblings about this. It's just a different energy. And not even just siblings. I've talked to other people about this, like meeting biofamily. It's a different energy. And I think this is not science-based from my mouth right now, but like
the world according to Stormey.
Yes. But it's like this weird, I just feel like it's like this genetic energy that is felt and can't necessarily be denied, where it's like, that's your genes. Yeah. And so I don't know, like I couldn't imagine being a birth mom and, placing my child and with the best intent, right? Hoping that they can have the life that you feel like you weren't able to provide them at that time. You're only hoping for good things for this baby. And that you have a baby out there, just like we know that we have like a mom out there. Yeah. And so you feel that forever and ever and ever. You can't just forget about it. It's on your mind in some form or fashion at some points in your life, And so to hear later that like, this child that you had hoped all these things for, they didn't receive that. Like I would imagine that would hurt. I would imagine there's probably feelings of guilt in a way, disappointment, all the things.
I was like thinking she needs a lot of counseling. The birth mom that you're talking about, that has to deal with that, because that would be a ton.
Well, yeah,
the loss of course, the loss of placing, but then also the guilt of thinking, well, maybe if I would have kept him, he wouldn't have done that.
Yes. So when it comes to like adoption in general, there's a lot of grief that's there, and that's where a lot of the trauma stuff shows up. And so we're looking at, there's grief of like if somebody dies, we know that they're gone and that's it. But this is like disenfranchised grief. This is like displaced grief, things like that, where you have all these hopes and dreams and it doesn't come to fruition. And now you have to like grieve that, the loss of these things. There's, it's not a complete loss because, that this person's out there in the world. So it's like, how do you reconcile
how do you grieve
with that?
For that? Because I think we've talked about, you say it's kind of like a death.
It is a death. It's like you're grieving a person that's still alive though.
Yeah.
And the unknown because it's not so final.
Yeah.
Yes. Like, so, because if it was a death, it would be final.
And you could, I don't think you ever heal from, I was talking to my cousin Heather and we were talking about grief and healing. She's like, I don't think you ever heal from grief or trauma. She's like, you just learn to either live with it or manage it or create a boundary so that you don't ever put yourself in a situation to like revisit that. But it's like, it becomes part of your DNA and who you are.
Yeah. It helps create some of who you become.
But then also it makes you who you are. And you're like, man, if I wouldn't have dealt with that, I wouldn't be me. Right. And I'm pretty awesome,
Well, that's what I always say. Yeah. I'm like, you change one thing in your life. I go, you change everything.
Yes. And that's from like adoptees, we have these core beliefs that we like carry with us and have to like at some point acknowledge. But I am curious, like, I don't know, from your perspective, was there any core beliefs that you felt like you carried since placing?
Explain. I know what a core belief is, but explain kind of what you mean so I can answer this correctly.
Yes. So I guess I'll go with my core belief. My core belief that I carried for a long time was like that I wasn't good enough. And so I always had to do extra, go the extra mile and achieve, because if I did, then people would need me, people would want me. And I guess at the end of it, at the core, it's like I needed to feel needed and wanted, because I did not feel needed and wanted by my biological mom.
Okay. So my core belief, because of adoption, and we've talked about this before, just because I was raised in a very religious home, my core belief was I wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I would never I wasn't lovable.
Mm-hmm.
I was a huge disappointment. And so I had to almost overcompensate for those things in ways and actions that I probably normally wouldn't do if I was in a healed place. And I still feel like I'm working through that, of feeling of not good enough or not.
Mm-hmm.
Was that based on just because of your pregnancy?
Yeah, because it was like such a disappointment. Like it was such a huge disappointment to everyone around me.
Okay.
And it was treated as this like catastrophe.
Right.
And I love my parents. They're amazing. They did the best that they could. But when they found out I was pregnant and told my sisters, they like pulled them aside. They're like, we have to tell you something about Jessica. It's like we have to tell you something. It is the worst thing. And my sister's thinking, oh my gosh, somebody died.
Yeah.
And then my mom told her, and she's like, that's not like the worst thing.
Yeah,
but
gave you the
There's a lot of things.
That was the core. That was basically like, you have failed us
Mm-hmm.
and all of the things and all of the
possible.
teachings, and you've done the worst thing possible. How could you do that
To us.
to us? And so it was a reflection of I even at almost 41, I find myself seeking out the validation from my parents
Mm-hmm.
that I've done good enough,
Yeah. I have that though.
which sucks.
I'm not a birth mom or anything, but I suffer with that too.
But I also think it coincides with the birth. I think that was like the catalyst of it all. But I also believe that it coincides with some of the core beliefs that I was taught growing up as well. So I think there's not one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's very layered.
But I think also too, though, because some of mine came from abuse when I was younger. So I'm wondering too, the abuse kicks in. And so then it's like then you really have no self-esteem and you really feel like you're not, and you're always trying to validate yourself. Or I was always a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And, feeling like I had to do everything. And if I said no, they wouldn't love me or like me or anything. But then I got old and I'm like, okay, I don't really care anymore.
Right.
You get to a point where
we were like, I mean, honestly, it's like too much energy. I got to a point and I'm like, I don't care if you don't like me then. Like me for who I am. But then I got called passive aggressive. Now I'm passive aggressive because I tell people how I feel. Which is still lame. But I also think that that's like a men versus women thing. Like the verbiage is so different, where it's like you're passive aggressive.
It was my sister that said it.
I know, but like she wouldn't say that to your brother or your dad.
No, because I was quiet and shy and never talked.
Oh, wow.
I would say that too, though. I wasn't a people pleaser per se, but like once you learn to set boundaries for yourself, everybody has an issue with it.
Right.
And they're like when I did my stint in therapy and
because you do become a different person.
You do.
Yes. You learn so many things that you're like, oh no.
You're like, that's why I'm doing that. That's not good. I want to break that habit. But it's like, I don't know. People are like, Stormie wasn't like this before. And I'm like, yeah, like I should have been, but I wasn't.
Yes.
But also you're like, people change and evolve. Like I need to be getting better and changing, because when you're not changing, you're doing nobody, especially yourself, any favors.
Right.
Well, let me tell you, I've been with my husband since I was 16. And he's like, can we go back to that person? I'm like, no.
Definitely not.
I'm like, I'm sorry. You got together. And I got married at 18. You married a child and we grew up together. I'm not going to be that person because there's years of.
Well, you're like, and I hope I'm not that person.
Right.
I know.
Right?
I'm like, why do you want to go back?
You're like, I don't even like that person. Like, the person I was at like 20 versus 25, 30. I'm like, I don't like some of those people. I'm like, oh.
Well, and then having children, because my children all had developmental issues with different stuff in schooling. And I was always shy and quiet. And you have to go up to bat for your kids to make sure.
Nobody else will.
No, because they want them to, I always say, they have this pretty little box with a bow on it. And they think everyone fits in this box. And none of my children did. And they don't know how to help those children that don't fit into the pretty little box. And so I had to, all 4 of mine, I would have to go to school things and get IEPs or this or that to make sure they were getting taken care of.
Do you think that that's also part like dealing, so you're dealing with the transracial adoptions, but then on top of that, if there's any like learning disabilities or anything, like does that just exasperate it?
It does, because a lot of these people, I mean, we all have, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We all need to feel a sense of belonging. Like that's definitely core on that. And for an adoptee, like if there are those feelings of rejection from the jump, you're already like, okay, where do I really belong? Right? Like you're brought into this new family and you're like, okay, I belong here. But then you get older and you do start to recognize some of the differences or like, feel different aspects of like disconnect. And you start to question like, okay, really, where do I belong? And, like we said, kids can be not nice. Yeah. And so once you hit some of those older stages, like your teenage years, junior high is not fun. High school is not fun. Teens are going through, that identity development phase and nitpicking each other, nitpicking themselves. And for a lot of our TRA youth, like being in a homogenous state, like they are being nitpicked on their race and they're being told who they should be based on how they present racially, and who they should not be based on how they present racially, which is a tailspin.
Can I tell you that with the boys, I saw that with what is put out there on TV and in videos and being raised by white parents, they think that that's what they should be as Black men.
And that is being, yes. And that's like being reinforced by their peers.
Yes.
Of like, well, you should know this, you're Black, or do you do this because you're Black? But and one thing that Brandon and I at Focal Point really try to emphasize is the difference between race and culture.
Yes.
A lot of the time for Black individuals, like our race is tied with Black culture. But like we are up here we're not necessarily just in Utah, but like we're being raised in a Western culture.
Yeah.
And that does not fit what I'm going to find over in the South or on the East Coast.
It's true.
And so when we're telling our youth, I've had this one person in my office, and they over Halloween had some like awful experiences, and it was a first time in certain ways for them where they were just like I don't know, like racially harassed, and like it was like very direct racism toward them, and it like shook them like a lot, like lots of tears in my office, didn't know how to handle it. They were like, I talked to my parents, but of course parents don't always know how to handle everything. But they really had to come to terms with like, because they separated themselves from Blackness a lot of the time.
Oh, okay.
And I just had to tell them, because it was always like Black people this and they that and they whatever. I was like, I hate to tell you, like you are them. You are the Black community. And that is what it is. But she had to start recognizing that for herself, so that so she wasn't creating this separation, because she's at an age now where the world is like starting to put her in these categories and groups, and
she's not used to that.
Yeah. And it's that disconnect of like race and culture for her. And I was just like, and this is where, again, I teach my clients, like you get to pick the pieces and parts that you want. You get to explore this for yourself. Like you don't have to take on all these personas and different things that you think you're supposed to be.
Or that other people think you should be.
Right.
Well, that's like, it's exhausting.
Yes. But it's just, again, all these teens at the space, they just want to be accepted. Yeah. They just want a sense of belonging.
And it's hard. My daughter, she's autistic, one of mine. And so she, I remember in high school, she would just cry because she needs help, but she realizes, she's like, I'm not normal. And she goes, and I won't be, and I'm behind everyone. And she realizes that. That's the hard part, is when they realize that they're not going to ever be able to do what everybody else, and they're looking different. I think that maybe there's a joy in being severe enough that you don't realize the difference.
Right.
Because in her case, I can't even tell you how many times she would be crying over that. And why can't I be normal or be this? And so she was dealing with that on top of being, she was, poor child, they were raised in Sandy out to high school. So it's like, you can't get much whiter than, I'm sorry.
It's true. Salem.
Spanish Fork area.
Okay, I don't know, because
that's probably true.
So my friend adopted a little girl through the agency, and she was a teacher at the not the high school, the elementary school that we like across the street from us.
Yes.
She purposely quit her job and pulled her daughter because her daughter was going to be starting kindergarten. And she's like, there are too many white people in the school and she's not going to get the education that she needs. So she got a job at another school and just so that her daughter could have those experiences. Because she's like, I will not allow my daughter to feel these feelings.
I mean, I see this more in Salt Lake with those clients up there. But coming in with all these like somatic symptoms, it's usually like increased anxiety. And then they always have stomach issues where it's like they're going to the doctors, or just the kids like having meltdowns at home after school. And every time the parents have switched schools and everything miraculously like disappears. And they're in a place where it's more diverse and everything disappears. And I just feel like again, I have another client that has pretty much stopped going to school, at least in person, and anxiety significantly decreased. And what I found with all my clients when we are processing certain things, all their stress and anxieties that are related to school, they don't think it's race related until we get into the process. And then they're like, oh, it's race related. Oh, it's all race related. And it's them trying to put on this persona to fit in. And it's them trying to not stand out too much. And them trying to navigate the discomfort that they feel when people are making racial comments or saying the N-word freely. Because again, if they speak up, then they're the one that is, again, made to feel different in that moment and all these things. But it's causing them all this stuff. And then they end up in my office. And I'm just like, okay.
Well, and it's hard too, because we also have... he's the sweetest kid in our neighborhood, but he has been having the hardest time at school with these kids saying these terrible things, calling him the N-word, like all these things. Yeah. And his friends that he's like best friends with aren't sticking up for him, but I don't think it's because they don't want, like how, like it's so hard because they're wanting to fit in. And so it's like, do I stick up for them?
But the thing is too, though, is has he told them that it's an issue for him?
Well,
because
no,
I think that a lot of times, because I have Korean sisters, I mean, our whole family's like, we got two of almost everything. But
you're like Noah's Ark.
it is. We do. Bring two. Got it. Let's go. But I also feel like, because with my sisters, I have one that she would laugh along with the jokes. Yeah. And they were about her. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Well, because she didn't want to feel out of place.
I was going to say, it was a protection mechanism, right? Because you're like, if I laugh.
And so that's why I'm saying, maybe if he told them and said, can you stick up? How old is he?
He's in
or educate
10th grade now.
The parents that he's friends with or something.
Like, I mean, his parents, that's the thing. It's like, they're all like, his mom is constantly like, I'm going to go to the school. And he's like, don't, Mom, that's going to make it worse for me. Yeah. Like, please don't do that. No, and that's going to make it worse.
Yes, it's like, it's kind of this, I mean, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Yes.
Either way.
Because you want to stick up for your child, and then you want your friends, your kids' friends to stick up for them too. But you also understand just like the socioeconomic.
But maybe they should go to the teacher that's teaching the class, not when everyone's around.
But it's like in hallways. It's like weird. Yeah. And they're so calling and doing like weird stuff.
And our legislature just like did away with a lot of the DEI stuff that has to do with helping in schools. And so, I mean, that kind of tells you where we're at as far as schools helping when it comes to those things.
Oh my gosh,
conversations.
They're horrible. I already know that dealing with my kids. Yeah. I mean, they're horrible with all that too.
So how can
in that circumstance, what do you do for your child?
Yeah. What would you do? I mean,
I always say, ask the child what they need and how they want to proceed, because they're the ones that has to go to school every day and like navigate the halls. Like I said, I've had clients like take breaks from school, pull from school so that they can just focus on stuff at home because the anxiety was so bad. I've had parents switch schools to more diverse schools so that their kid feels like they have a place of belonging there. I always advocate for my clients to put their children in more spaces. I mean, even after school where there are people who look like them so that they can just relax for a second and not feel like they have to like be on guard to defend, their identity or to I essentially just be on guard the whole day. But from I guess an indirect approach so that the child doesn't have to be involved, like be the parent who goes and sits in the school board meetings and advocates for different policies at the school, go up to the state capitol and actually advocate for the different policies that are being put in place at schools, because, to deny these aspects of like race and diversity and things like that in all forms and facets, right, is to deny people's identities. And so with our youth, specifically our TRAs, like if you you know, like they are going to have different abilities. Sometimes that's like different cognitive abilities and learning abilities. But when it comes to the differences in like race and culture and things like that, like go sit with the school board meetings and go to the district meetings and advocate for your kid, show up to the PTA things and advocate for what is the school doing to help, I guess, emphasize the things that
will best help your child.
That will best help your child,
Well,
or
make
like
them
to
feel,
see them.
Yeah. Because that's part of it is they're just not seeing them,
right?
And they're not seeing it as a problem,
no,
because it's not the majority,
right?
And that's
a minority.
And the people making these laws, unfortunately, have never experienced any of that.
And that's true. When my sons play football, one of the other parents said something that made me so angry because he goes, I don't see racism here. I'm like, this is literally what I said. I'm like, how would you see racism? You're white, and I bet all your friends are white. Yeah. I go, so where are you going to see it? You know what I mean? I see it, and I've witnessed it numerous times. I mean, Christopher, I think I told you this before. He was actually on the news and stuff for racism that happened over at the Macy's grocery store. Mm. And because they followed him, they treated him like he was a criminal. It was horrific. Yeah. And we had the manager, the owner of Macy's, sit down with us and stuff and ask, and then they implemented a whole training program.
Which I feel like it shouldn't still be happening.
You wouldn't think so, but that's the thing is people don't think it's happening. Yes. And it's a hush-hush issue. Yep. And it should be brought to light and say, yes, it does happen. To say that it never happens is just crap.
Well, and that's a piece of like just the TRA experience in general, right? Whether it's the adoption trauma stuff or the, adoption in general stuff and the race stuff, it's like it happens. It's here. Yeah. Let's normalize the conversation instead of pretending like it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Well, and I think that's with anything, right? So it's like with adoption, with abortion, with transracial adoption, with like racism, all the things. Like let's just have like the more you normalize it, right? I do this with my kids with sex. I'm like, the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the less weird you're going to be about it. Exactly. And we can have these open conversations, and then things change.
Seriously, you don't want to have those conversations.
No, I know we've had them. Trust me, and they're awkward.
Goodness.
I always tell my boys, I'm like, I'm not stupid. I was your age once, so I go at least use a condom. That's what
I'm like. Here's books. We'll educate ourselves.
I know my husband called me. He's like, "Oh my gosh, this happened," and I was like, "Well, sorry, I'm not home. I gotta go. Bye." Yeah.
I just always tell my
boys, so I'm like, "You're gonna be in charge, but also should you be in charge?"
Books.
I don't know.
Books. I always tell my boys, I go, I know you guys are doing stuff, so just make sure you have a condom. That's all I can tell you.
Oh,
that's condom. And so literally I found condoms. So obviously they're listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They listen to that.
That's all that matters. But
I'm like, because you might want kids later in life and you don't want to catch something. You seriously have to
all of it. Yes. You have to think about that.
You have to, especially when you have boys, because boys are just like all over the place. Yeah, my girls, I don't have. They don't have to worry about that.
Well, I didn't think I had to worry about it either, but clearly didn't work out for me.
Education, knowledge is power.
When the doctor asked me, he's like, "So after this baby, do you want to be on contraceptives?" And I looked at him, I was like, "I'm good." And then he walked out. I looked at my sister. I'm like, "What are contraceptives?"
That's how
she's like, birth control, but clearly you didn't know that. But that's how it is. Like you just don't.
You didn't know what contraceptives were.
They don't talk about it.
They don't say the word. Nobody, they don't say contraceptives. Yeah. They just say like birth control or like use a condom or take the pill or.
I don't know if this still stands, right? But like certain doctors' offices here in Utah, like we don't call it like, a women's wellness check or like it's like a premarital checkup, which is like. I feel like that's just a Utah thing.
Yeah, I think that
literally with the assumption of you have never had sex before going into a marriage.
Okay,
they call it that. But like, I've
never heard of it.
Oh my gosh,
but I can understand it.
Yes.
That needs to change.
But I was just saying, nobody talks about those things.
No, yes.
Like I remember I had a friend who got married and like, I think it was on their honeymoon. She was like, yeah, I had a UTI, but like, she didn't know anything. She didn't know.
They had to go to the bathroom after?
All the things.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's just like, knowledge is power. And I wish it was, we could go on for days about Utah sex ed, but
I don't know.
The lack thereof, you mean.
But even California sex ed, my mom was so uncomfortable talking about it. Like we just never, it's like the minute I got engaged, she's like, okay, let's talk about it. And I'm like, okay, so like, I already had a baby. I think.
So I already know what.
I think I kind of know like how it works. So we're good. You don't need
I've already been there, done that.
You don't need to take me through that.
All the things.
I got my own education.
I remember my mom saying like, I like taught you guys about this stuff, right? And I was like, no.
Not even a little. Did.
Like, yeah.
But also you're like, did I want my mom to do it? You're like,
probably not. But
no.
I literally, yeah, we never talked about that stuff in the house growing up.
No, there's certain things. I still have all my children at home.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, it's that we don't all kill each other. That's what I say. I'm like, there's so many different personalities that go on with the four and them being adults. But over time, I think I've addressed most of the issues.
You're still hoping.
So I'm hoping. I'm like, if you have questions, please come. And they will come to me more than they will their dad.
Oh, yeah.
So, because they feel like and I've tried to change. So I feel like I'm a work in progress too. And I go, I can apologize for how I raised you because I'm sure I made a million mistakes.
Well, we all did.
And I go, but tell me what it is you need me to work on. And I will do that, you know? And so that's what I've tried to do. And so they talk to me and they'll talk to me a little bit more, but.
I just tell my kids, please don't Google anything.
No.
I'm like, you will be
scarred
for life.
You know what
Google
I hate is Reddit.
Oh, really? I think Reddit's hilarious. I don't ever go on it, but like occasionally there'll be like a news story about it.
People put stuff on there. My daughter that's autistic will go on there and read stuff and they think it's true.
Oh gosh.
And anyone can put whatever they want on there. Good, bad, you know what I mean? And I'm like, please do not go to that to learn about education.
No.
I'm like, do not listen.
I'm like books. I'm like all my teenagers. I'm like, you have crushes. You're all starting to date. Like we're going to educate ourselves.
Yes.
What's the one? Okay. Really quick. What is the one book or 3 books or whatever that you recommend to your teen
for like
clients?
sex ed?
Well, just more sex ed or in
I don't
general
give them
or
books
adoption
to read in general. Cause they're not
going to read them. Do you have
an adoptee book or like how to like navigate that? Is there a book that they can read? So we
actually with Focal Point have created like all of our own curriculum and things like that.
Okay.
But one of the books that I do recommend for I guess peace of mind and so they can find like commonality. There's a book called What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption. It's written by a TRA. She was a Latino transracial adoptee, if I recall. And so that one's a good one, brings insight. And then for adoption trauma in general, there's another book. I believe the author is Sherry Eldridge. It's 20 Things Adopted Kids Wish Their Adopted Parents Knew, something like that.
Okay.
That's one that I recommend. As far as sex ed goes, there's a book called It's Perfectly Normal. That one's kind of for like older teens. And then the other one is called, what is it called? What's Happening to Me. There's like a boy version and a girl version.
Okay.
Good
to know.
Yeah.
I would love to bring you and your business partner on to talk about Focal Point and just Focal. Okay. Just making sure I'm saying it correctly.
I'll tell you. So we got to that name. I mean, our conversations happened coming, I guess, in undergrad and then kind of out of undergrad. And we were just like, how do we get back to the TRA community? And essentially it was like, how do we make them the focus of the conversations? But then also the idea of like, when you are surrounded by a sea of whiteness, like you do become the focal point a lot of times.
Yeah, that's true.
But then even in the narratives of adoption, like everybody talks about adoption, but people don't talk about TRAs. And so again, want to make them the focal point.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's amazing. And I would love to hear about your curriculum and all of the things. So you're going to have to come back.
Of course. I will always come back.
And so your partner is
he adopted as well?
Yes.
And he's Black as well. Okay.
Okay.
And then the person underneath you?
Yes.
Okay. And it's a she.
Yes.
Right. It's a she. That's
so also TRA. And that's just happenstance that we all happen to be TRAs right now. Hopefully, we're looking to hire another clinician and just continue the work. But
and did you all meet at the U, like in your?
No. So Brandon and I met in undergrad.
Okay.
And then at UVU. Okay. And then I had continued up at the U and he continued just a year after me at the U. He took like a gap year. And then went from there. And then my clinician, she actually did her schooling at NYU.
Oh, okay.
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you for joining us
Yeah,
today,
we can talk
Stormie.
like
That
we-
was
I'm sure
amazing.
we could talk like for hours.
Well, I know that's what I'm saying. We'll have to like have her come back like
We're
once
totally
a month
going
and
to.
like
More
do all
stuff.
that stuff so we can get it out there, so we can get all the information about transracial adoptions and adoptees
And you could be a really good resource for our families because
Yes.
it is a thing, I think, in Utah more than other places,
Yes.
the
'cause it's not as
transracial adoption.
it's not as diverse.
Well,
And then-
we do a lot of transracial adoptions in Utah.
Yes. No, we
A
are one of
huge
the
number.
higher rates for
Yes.
transracial adoption out here.
Yeah.
And that's again where it's like we wanted focal point too, because I know that there's a lot of narratives that are like, against adoption and
Yes.
against transracial adoption and things like that. But for us, it's like it's happening.
Mhm.
So instead of like, I guess asking people to give their children back, because that can't happen. How do we educate these parents and help
what
them,
is
especially because
yours-
they're looking for resources?
What is your stance on it? I always like to ask people.
My
though.
stance on adoption,
Yes.
transracial
Transracial
adoption?
Yes.
Kids need a home, and children should not be denied a home just based on race, And so again, like if parents are willing to take the time to educate themselves, then I think that it can be a happy, healthy upbringing. I think that the unfortunate aspect about adoption is that, when we're asking people to adopt, a lot of the conversation is like about the positive things and creating a family and, the joys there, but it doesn't include the hard parts about adoption, because I don't think that there's any adoptive parent out there that will say this was all so easy the whole time.
Your mom daily is like, this is so freaking hard.
So I think if we could normalize the conversation about
Yes.
the difficulties that come with adoption in general and transracial adoption, that these parents would be better prepared to meet the full needs of the children.
Do you wish that you weren't adopted then?
No. Like I said, I had my siblings very much a safe haven or a protective factor in that way. And we had our own little tribe. I do think that my parents did the best that they could. And for me, like my race navigation was not like the hardest piece of my upbringing.
Okay.
I think that as I got older, like I found the pieces of like Black community that like took me in and helped me heal some of those different parts. But I think I can say this because I know my bio family, but like understanding the dynamics of which like my birth took place, like I would not be where I'm at today if that was the circumstance. I think that, in the home that I was in or would have been in, my older sister was already being raised outside the home, kind of in like a kinship foster care placement type situation. And my brother was back and forth, watched his mom in and out of jail and things like that. And I would have been the youngest and very close in age to Steven. And I wouldn't have it wouldn't have been good.
Yeah.
So
You wouldn't be where you're at.
yeah.
Okay.
And doing all the good that you're doing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. For
Thank you.
answering that.
Of course.
Thank you. So if you or anyone is close to you thinking of adoption, I don't know what I'm supposed to say here. I've always messed
Okay.
this up.
I kept it in the last time.
You did?
Yeah.
And it was terrible.
Well, you were talking like this, and I'm like,
Oh.
it's your job.
I always never know how to end it. It's just
That's how it is.
You're like,
Okay, thanks for
it's
coming.
awkward.
it is awkward because
Yeah.
you're just staring at yourself, talking to
Oh,
yourself.
wait, I have
and
one
it's just-
thing.
oh, what?
So we have an event. We have a couple things coming up, but when it comes to TRAs, the Domino Foundation, have you heard of them before?
No.
So the Domino Foundation is a nonprofit. They are mostly located in Salt Lake area, but the Lintons, they've adopted 2 children transracially. And so they have definitely dedicated a lot of their time and space to DEI work as well as advocacy for transracial adoption.
Okay.
I'm writing down the information
okay,
just
awesome.
so I don't forget.
And we did their camp with them last year, and we're also doing it again with them this year. So in July.
Will you send me when you get the dates
Yes.
for sure?
Well, because
and
if you send the information, then I can also put it on the social
Mhm.
our Facebook and those
Yes. Yeah.
platforms
Okay.
for you
Yes.
too.
no, that would
Because
be
the first
that would
half
be
is
awesome.
families.
Mhm.
And then the second half is we're really trying to bring in adult adoptees this year
Okay.
so that they can be part of the camp and I guess have their own little
I've got 4 adult
therapeutic
adoptees.
stuff. So
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that registration
Yes,
for the
it is.
adults is not open yet.
Okay.
But the family stuff is open.
Awesome.
And
Okay.
so-
Yeah. If you send the information, then we can also post it for you guys.
Awesome. Cool.
That would be great.
Thank you for joining us today on Active Love Adoptions podcast with Stormie Nielsen. This was definitely something that has been needed to be talked about and brought to light. And hopefully we can continue doing that. If you or anybody you know is looking into adoption, visit our website at activeloveadoptions.com.